Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Susan Terry, who is Senior Vice President and Head of Product at Alvaria. This is a transatlantic recording. Susan is, I would suggest, a bit of a legend in the industry. I had the chance last week to talk to Susan for the first time and came away kind of blown away by her insights and her views on the industry. So we're very, very lucky to be speaking to Susan today. So, Susan, welcome very much to Get Out of Rap.
Thank you. Very nice to actually be on this side of listening to your podcast. I love it.
Oh, that's nice to hear. And I know you potentially you just shared then this is the transatlantic nature that you're in the middle of a bit of a tornado hurricane.
Yeah, we are. This is Indiana in the flatlands in the late summer. So I definitely am, but so far so good.
The element of jeopardy to the podcast. I love it. So you're at Alvaria now. We're going to touch on we're going to get to the really interesting things you're doing and your views on the industry, which are fascinating. But I wonder if you could just take us through a snapshot of your career to date. So as I said, you know so many people know you, but where did it all start for you?
Yeah. So I've actually done the position that I'm in right now in three different industries. And I am old enough to date back to when software applications had to move to the internet, right? And so working in Silicon Valley when startups were the business model and venture capitalists were the mechanism, right? Very different than what I would say the world we live in today, where private equity is the name of the game, right? So as those transformations happen, the business requirements around transformation often become financial led rather than
Mhm.
innovation led. But my first industry was actually in the graphic arts space. I went to Purdue. I was in communications, was in the graphics and printing and pre-press environment when you went from a traditional printing press to a digital press. And so it was all about how do you teach the businesses from that industry how to evolve their business environment to work in digital. How do you work with customers to help them understand the process changes and everything that needs to happen, but also the value that comes with that transformation by the use of technology? So I later then did that in the advertising sector in New York City. And for about 18 years, it's been contact center. And my very first job was a company that was later sold to Enghouse. Um, but they had three distinct platforms and they needed to pull them together into one. And so transformation's just been a part of kind of what I've done from the beginning.
Wow. Does that multi-industry, but with the current sort of the underlying theme of transformation, has that given you a unique perspective and your experience to be able to say where we are now in the contact center customer experience world?
Certainly, I think it has given me a tool set that might be a little bit different from people that are, that I respect that have been in this industry forever, right? I think I tend to maybe look at things a little bit differently because of my experience in the other industries and seeing how customers have responded over time. So whether you are moving from, you know, into a digital workflow for the cloud, or you are moving from prem to cloud, or now you're moving from traditional contact center applications to AI enabled applications. I think maybe the understanding of the customer impact leading with the process piece, leaning less maybe on operational impact and the value to contact center, and really focusing on this is about the customer. This is about customer experience. In a lot of cases, this is about companies that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars integrating back end systems. This isn't a simple move for them,
Mm.
right? Everything has to change. So, yeah, I do think I've got maybe a different view, and I'm sure there are others in the industry that do too, but I'm grateful for it and being able to pull on that. So, yeah.
And then Alvaria, what was it about their proposition, what they were looking to have you undertake and lead that excited you?
So, Alvaria, for people that aren't aware, is basically the combination of two legacy stalwarts, right? That's Noble and Aspect that came together through a private equity motion. Um, and at the point that I came into the company, it was very much about defining the ICP, right? Defining what is it that Alvaria does distinctly in this industry. And, clearly outbound, specifically enterprise scale compliance related to outbound is where Alvaria still stands apart. And it is largely because we look at all of the components of outbound as a single solution instead of partitioning out lists and contacts and then partitioning campaigns and partitioning compliance from execution. When we pull those in together as a single solution, there is far greater control over things like compliance.
Yeah.
And all of the process elements that drive compliance. So in the UK, if you've got a sub millisecond response time for a dialer to be answered by a human, that's got to be engineered. That must be orchestrated. And that has to feed the entire process. So for me, what was really interesting was how do we look at this company that's kind of been a mishmash, right? We had a WFM focus, we had a bit of a QM play, we had legacy Noble environments that had been traditional contact centers. But looking across all of them, what you quickly could identify is the common threads, and it was outbound. And it
Mm.
was this shared layer that basically said, you know what, I've run a play like this before. I've done it twice, and I've done it twice in a contact center. It's let's use those common areas um, to drive a single approach to a very starkly different customer base, but innovate and focus on what we do better than anybody else and let that be the distinguishing factor for the organization and for our solutions.
And you mentioned something earlier on about, I think most commentators at the moment will say we're going through this great period of transformation within the industry. But I really loved you said there, like, who is the transformation for, and why are you doing it? And now, is it customers, or is it operations, or is it financial? Where do you think we are then when you look at it through that lens?
Uh, well, I think I'll set the table to the answer by first saying I'm a Richard Branson believer in the sense that if you take care of your people, then the customers will be taken care of. I think the reverse of that is also true. And what I mean by that is the customers are what's important, right? This isn't about driving. If we're in the business today called CX, why are we reactive in nature? Right? Why are we designing for what's already happened? right? Why are we not using these mountains of data elements that we have about our customers and their behavior to proactively establish an experience, right? Why wait for the inbound call? We can mine inbound outcomes and identify exactly the trends and when these customers are going to be reaching out and probably what they're going to be reaching out about. So why are we waiting? Why are we waiting for that inbound outreach? If we really want to drive great customer experience, we've got to be on our toes. We've got to be leaning into that, not sitting back and waiting. So I think that uh, what I'm seeing, and I hope I'm answering your question, is that we've got an opportunity at Alvaria to lean into the growth that we're seeing in use cases for proactive outreach. And it's not even really about outbound anymore, right? It's about proactive outreach. And the difference is that outbound is an old school contact center, dial for dollars or collections workflow, right? Those are the tactical operational use cases. There are hundreds of use cases that don't have anything to do with tactical or operations, right? And so I think that what we are jumping onto is that wave of customers that's saying there's a paradigm shift here, right? Our proactive outreach should be as big or bigger than our inbound volumes. And it's not about call deflection. It's not about let's deflect to a channel so we don't have to have a human on it. It's about there's a better way to build a brand identity. There's a better way to deliver an experience that make customers want to come back. So that's kind of I guess that's my response. And I'm not sure I answered your question, but
Uh,
that's where I would take it.
I might even do this afterwards. I might edit in a standing ovation round of applause because that last answer, that last few minutes, you've so eloquently hit the nail on the head about some of the things I've been saying to people around the perception and the language we use associated with proactive outreach, and you verbalized it so well there. It is no longer just outbound. That is outdated. When you combine that with, as you say, we've never known more about our customers than right now. So are we using that? And I think, that kind of a fundamental level, why are we being reactive when we don't have to be, and we could actually deliver true customer experience through joining everything together and going, why, like you say, we know why someone's contacting us.
Yeah, it's engagement, right? Ultimately, if you want somebody to spend money or you want them to be a repeat customer or you want them to stay when the competitor knocks, their view and degree of engagement with you that is positive and proactive is going to be a big factor in that decision, right? So again, I think and this kind of leans into, what's the role AI is playing. And we are fortunate enough right now to have taken our solution and created an outreach infrastructure as a service, right? So if you step back and say Alvaria does compliant outreach better than anybody, if we believe that is a statement, certainly we do at Alvaria. Um, when I strip the agent layer off of that and say, I can put that infrastructure anywhere, right? And we've got 2 customers today already on that platform, about 3 or 4 coming behind it. And I'm, proud to say that's Zoom and that's Parloa, the first 2
Mm.
out of the gate. So you've got 2 starkly different companies, both in CX, if you will, but one is looking at it as the traditional, you know, business comms, CC comms, collaboration, AI and tremendous things they're doing with AI. It's phenomenal what they're building. And then you've got Parloa that's, kind of in the same breath as me saying, this isn't about operations, right? AI isn't about saving you money. AI is about how do we engage better with our customers. So through both of those partnerships, we are seeing how outreach is going to evolve, right? And where, right? When you really step back and look at it, if I am an infrastructure as a service and I don't provide an agent layer, what you're really talking about is outreach can happen attached to any system that sits on customer contact information, outcome data, what's going on with that customer. So you can connect this kind of solution to a CRM, right? And you could start with the very tactical use cases that say CRMs do messaging, they send reminders, right? They do those very tactical old school use cases for outbound, and they have a compliance requirement too. So flip that and say you can also attach that to, and this is a UK opportunity that we're exploring, a utility provider that says we've already gone 100% self-serve with our customers, and we use our CRM and a homegrown self-serve layer. If we can attach you into that, what do we need? Do we need a CRM? We're already digital channels. We're already self-serve. You give us the ability to fire outbound SMS or WhatsApp with bills attached or links to bills, right? So it's the evolution of kind of what's happening in the business, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean contact centers are going away. I don't think I'll live in the period of time when that happens. But I do think there's a decentralization that's largely going to be driven by AI and how companies start to structure data in the infrastructure,
Mhm.
right? Because that customer data is shared inside a business. Databases kind of limit the sharing, they blunt the ease of use for AI, right? So I think it's a shift in infrastructure as a service doesn't fight for desktop space, doesn't fight for um, anything that people feel they want to control, right? It is an infrastructure. Plug it in with the methodology, the orchestration, the campaign logic, and the ability to execute multi-channel or omni-channel campaigns. And it can serve a lot of different functions in the environment. And again, I think it comes back to not every company has a contact center,
Yeah.
right? So that's the evolution that we think is happening, and it's what we're seeing and hearing from our customer bases. So for me, it's why wouldn't you take that job, right? Why wouldn't you be a part of, one more opportunity to see how things are going to evolve, but ultimately to respond to what you see happening in the industry due to an innovation like AI.
It's so fascinating, especially that kind of decentralization point where do you think we'll start seeing contact centers again? It's a lot of it's about the vernacular, isn't it? The kind of the vocabulary that people are using.
It is, and I've got plenty of people inside Alvaria that probably wish that I wasn't so focused on vernacular sometimes, but yes, outreach. And you said it, it's just so different from outbound. If you're in the contact center, outbound is a tool, right? Outbound is something that attached to the contact center, right? It attached to the switch. It was mechanical in nature and very reactive in nature. but very necessary. It was also a state where how many times did you walk into a contact center where outbound and inbound were completely separate functions,
Yeah.
completely separate contact
Yeah.
centers, completely separate technology, right? I mean, outbound really was utilized in a billing function.
Mm.
And so, I think we're seeing those days change where it's no longer my outbound contact center is there and it's on that platform. My inbound is here, it's on that platform. They're still out there, those separations, but that's certainly evolving. And again, I think some of that comes back to data, right? We can't have the data living in multiple places. We can't maintain it multiple ways. And we've got to sit back and look at the infrastructure inside our customers' business and what they're doing to tool for the use of AI and the standardization they're going to bring in that infrastructure uh, so that we can be compliance from a data perspective, an AI perspective, let alone regulatory compliance for outreach.
Mm.
Um, so, um, yeah, I think that um, the vernacular matters uh, and the definitions matter.
It really does, and I can't help. This is where you're, you really do prompt a lot of thought in what you're saying, especially around. You mentioned the UK opportunity here, the utilities company, and you think really the way you're structured and the partnerships that you have with Zoom and Parloa, there isn't a setup that doesn't lend itself to getting the best out of what you're offering. So you mentioned that kind of, if someone has pursued a self-service, we don't necessarily want to engage with customers reactively, and we don't have even a contact center per se. There's still an opportunity for them to really generate great customer experience, which competitively is probably going to be the biggest
Powerful.
edge. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and again, if you sit back in some of the sessions we have internally, and it's what are some of the other segments we need to be thinking about, right? And it this doesn't mean that Alvaria doesn't still have a solution that customers use in their contact center. We
Mm.
absolutely do. But by bringing those into a common structure, right? AIP is the name of the product. AIP can be delivered as a SaaS product with an agent layer, or it can be delivered infrastructure as a service without the agent layer. What it does for us as a company is allow us to focus all of our investment and innovation resources into one solution. Right. And I do think that's some of the challenge across the CCaaS space today. Certainly, there are the big ones that have plenty of money to invest, and I'm always envious of those zeros. But at the same time, they've got a lot of prioritization decisions that have to come with that. Right. So if you're sitting on a CCaaS stack today, where do you invest? Right. Because more than likely, you've got more than 10 or 15 databases in that stack, right, that contain information that would be valuable in an AI workflow. But if you don't have an architecture and an infrastructure that allow you to easily get to that data, how do you do that? Right. So when we strip down in that infrastructure as a service model, it's clean. Right? It's the integration. We're using the customer's agent desktop, right? They're accessing us through their environment. The work that we have to do, and the innovation that we drive, we can drive in a clean way. We can drive in a way that AI, um, as we continue to layer it in, is an easier consumption, right, through the product. And it still carries all of the regulatory requirements with it. But it impacts cost, it impacts sale price, it impacts margin, all of those things that private equity and business owners want to focus on. So it's a really good trade-off for us. And as many of our largest customers, I mean, we have, I don't know, 50, 60% of the world's largest banks using us for these things. Um, Outreach continues to be a big driver. So if they know that's an investment that we're going to continue to drive, it's a good outcome. And I think it's a good outcome for the partners that are saying, yeah, we've got some outbound, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe they've even made an acquisition for an outbound provider. But what's the investment portfolio required to maintain compliance, to maintain all of the things that go along with the highly secure and compliant outreach solution for a very large enterprise? Um, it's not a soft number, right? It's a big nut to crack. And so again, prioritization, where does that fall in priority for the CCaaS and their customers? So again, kind of taking it back to the beginning, that's why that initial ICP, which was actually determined before I walked in the door, is look, outreach needs to be a focal point for us. It needs to be the investment strategy, the innovation strategy. Um, and so far, the early signs are it was a good call. So for
It
all the people that were a part of that before I walked in the door, I thank them.
yeah. But it sounds like, some that's very impressive. 50 to 60% of some of the major financial institutions around the world, where certainly the integrity of their data and the compliance elements that are needed are pretty stringent. And if you can operate within the confines of that environment, then that must be reassuring to potential customers as well.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that when when we get pulled in, compliance probably is the number one requirement, or maybe the second largest requirement. And we still have some scenarios where probably the number two CCaaS player or three or four, whomever they are, we still have other CCaaS providers send their customers to us and say, hey, go to Alvaria and use their list management and attach it to us, or use their compliance and attach it to us. We don't do that anymore, right? We've kind of stopped partitioning out the IP for the benefit of, the competition, as that now has become our focal point. But again, I think it speaks to where do people want to invest? And it's not a criticism. It's their business profile is different than my business profile. So
Mhm.
for me, the investment in outreach as a product owner makes 100% sense. If I am an overall PM for a CCaaS product, that may look a little different. Um, but I do think that that resonates with customers as well, knowing that we're investing in that compliance engine, knowing that we will bring secure uses of AI into that environment, not so much from a customer data perspective, but the analysis layer of here's the list of customers, here are the regulatory compliance that map to those customers and the campaign focus. AI is going to make that a much different process for us. And so that becomes the lean in point for us on AI, where I think everybody else has to think about using AI in a lot of different point solutions that have come together to form, a total.
Do you you mentioned earlier, this kind of, we've never known more about customer behavior. And do you find when you're approached by potential clients They say, look, we want to start delivering a better customer experience for our customers. We have all of this data. We know the touch points and we know the outcomes and the events that are likely to happen based on all of this previous data that we've had. But we want to shift from being reactive to that to proactive, which is going to reduce customer effort, increase customer delight. Does that mean do you spend a lot of time helping them understand where the proactive outreach can take place in that customer journey?
I would say increasingly yes. And we do that not just through the direct engagement with the customer, but uh, through the use case stories,
Mm.
right? That we might develop based off of our own database of customers who are doing outreach, right? There's not, what I've tried to start to say to some of our team is there's probably not a single outbound use case that you can't make proactive, meaning you could do it sooner in the process of the customer journey before they contact you
Yeah.
instead of after,
Yeah.
right? And so it really is just a matter of kind of turning those old school use cases on the ear, if you will, and then to your point, mapping back to outcome data from inbound interactions. Uh, you know, we had a customer where we were able to basically sit back and we didn't even look at data. They just were talking to us about these are the top outcomes in my inbound environment in this department in our company. And you can literally spin the proactive version of a campaign that should be generated based off of just that conversation point.
Yeah.
When you step back and now, if you had the pure data, you don't even need to know who the customers are, right? That's the other thing is it's what are the outcomes I'm dealing with? And then generate at what point can I make that a proactive and eliminate the inbound? Then you go back and you can bounce that against data sets that are historically trending, right? So if somebody really wants to sit down and talk about operational efficiency, what are the 5 use cases you'd run today that are proactive? And let's go back and talk about what the impact would have done if you would have started doing that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? Um, so it doesn't take long for it to
No.
click with the customer.
Mm.
And again, I recently had a conversation with um, probably our largest customer or one of them. And it was to this point of, right now, very traditional use cases. But what about these use cases? And look, our customers are so focused on doing their job, they're not always lifting their head up to think about, they want to know how can
Yeah.
I use AI for these, but they're not stepping back and looking at it right from a different view. And so I do think that's our responsibility. I think that's our responsibility as a vendor in the CX space. It's not about technology. I'm not talking to them about technology, talking to them about their customer information and how to make sure that those customers spend more, they stay longer, right? They're happier, and they talk about being happy with that vendor. So, technology is just the enabler. Uh, we got to lean in on that business value. And I think everybody's trying to drive that shift. Certainly, we're not the only vendor doing that. But I think when it comes to outreach, we're one of the few vendors that are driving that disposition.
It's very, very refreshing to hear um, from a vendor saying, just recognizing that your clients are very much probably engaged in the tactical delivery of their service or product to their customers. And you can help elicit that strategic thinking about the art of what's possible. I loved hearing that. That was great.
Yeah. It reminds me, Martin, of a company, gosh, probably 7 or 8 years ago that you would know, who happened to crack into the CX space by talking to the marketing departments instead of talking to the contact center operations folks, right? Uh, and why? Because it's the marketing team's responsibility to have that broader view,
Mm.
right? To have that broader exchange of how do we engage customers? And so, I still follow that particular organization because they did it, right? They were able to move into the contact center space because they approached it with business value discussions to the people where business value was their number one priority, not to mention the budget to match that.
Mm.
Right? So that's your difference between OpEx and people that spend budget to invest in gaining customers. So gain the customer, keep the customer. And I guess I'm just leaning in saying that we're at a point now, with as far as technology has come, that, man, keeping customers can look different than it has before.
And would you say that, given your kind of agile approach, the partnerships that you have, that there's less restrictions from a existing legacy tech stack point of view?
Um, Trust me, I'm still living in legacy tech stack. Um,
Aren't we all?
and it's funny because this um, culture and product environment is very similar to the one I came from, right? In the sense that you were industry veterans with solutions that had been around so long, but they were bulletproof and customers refused to give them up, right? And whether they refuse to give them up because they're bulletproof or because they're fully depreciated and they can build a surround around it, without buying new. But for whatever reason, there is a loyalty there to the product. And so that product life cycle journey in a situation like the one I'm in now and the one I was in before, you can't play with those. You've got to find a way to meet that customer with the environment that they have today. Um, and the more you enable, I kind of call it innovation over the top, right? The more you enable them to touch and feel and experience and generate from new sources of workflows and offerings for customers, the more comfortable they become with that concept of, okay, that's happening in the cloud, but everything's still living on my prem. And I'll be honest, in certain parts of the world, we're still selling premise
Mhm.
systems.
Yeah.
And um, some of that's compliance, some of that's federal governments and countries saying you're not putting that in the cloud. Right? So I think that as long as security and compliance remain a concern, premise is going to be in our future, full stop. We will continue to support that. We'll support that through some hybrid innovation where workflows can be formed in the cloud, and we will preserve all data on-prem, right? We will meet the customer where they are. Um, at the same time, are we going to continue to invest in code bases that are 20 years old? Very selectively, right? Very selectively. Uh, it's more about either how do you move that into a place that can be more easily managed, standardized, so from premise to private cloud, right? As so many of us have had to do. And then how do you layer in that hybrid innovation? Because at some point, the people making the decisions today to stay on prem or to stay on that old platform, if they've been doing that for 20 or 30 years, like me, they might be looking for the beach in the near term. And as those transitions happen, um, the people that are coming new into those roles are going to view those classic or legacy or heritage environments um, differently, right? So I think we continue to have to be receptive to supporting the customers that want to keep what they have while also providing them the ability to innovate and putting the investment in the innovation in the environments that innovate as opposed to that premise environment where investment really doesn't result in the same kind of impact for the customer. Uh, So I think that we're not going to be absent those classic types of platforms for a while in this space. But it's happening more and more.
Mm.
Hybrid is happening more and more. We've got customers saying, "Yep, I'll go public cloud, but I want a premise redundant environment." Right? They're going opposite to the way we sold it 10 years ago. It was, "Okay, move to, stay on your prem, but let's spin up a cloud environment for you for redundancy." Right? That way it's only backup.
Yeah.
Now it's reversing. Some of that's AI, some of that's regulations. In the EU, it's definitely, the EU AI reg are starting to make people rethink what that looks like. So, um, I don't think that the technology may change, but I think that that premise place is gonna continue to exist. I didn't believe voice was going away when they started saying it 20 years ago, and I don't believe premise is going away either.
Well, you were proved very much right with that, and I no doubt just listening to you speak, you're going to be proved right with the majority of what you've said today.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I certainly hope so because I'm a big believer in trying to help shift the understanding of outbound to proactive customer outreach and what that actually means, and just what's possible when everyone's looking for a marginal gain or a better way of servicing their customers and delivering great customer satisfaction and outcomes. More and more people should be looking at proactive customer outreach, as you said so eloquently throughout this.
Yeah, I was just gonna lean in on that. I think part of what's changing, Martin, is and agentic agents are pivotal in that discussion, right? Because for whatever reason, where you're really seeing massive adoption of a pure agentic workflow is on outreach.
Yeah.
Um, and human in the loop, right, tends to really be the inbound scenario. So whether that's human led or agentic led, um, they're still looking for the combination on the inbound in some use cases and sensitive use cases in others, right? An agentic agent is simply replacing an IVR. And how many people in the world would be happy to hear that, except for the IVR people, right? But the reality is the agentic agents today, the voice quality, the ability to adapt and learn to emotions and sentiment, and be trained by their human in the loop counterpart. Uh, the experience with an agentic workflow instead of an IVR is just so very different. Uh, it's more engaging than those IVRs ever could be. Uh, but um, the agentic agents are definitely changing the game across the board. And those use cases will continue to evolve, I think. It's just now getting the rest of the workflow in the contact center to catch up, right? So, what does quality management look like for an agentic agent? You still have to do it, right?
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
not do it. But the outcome is if an agentic agent fails, it's likely a data source issue, right? So what's the workflow that ties, right? How do we fix that so it doesn't happen again? Um, it's almost like your very best agents are training your agentics. like they've become the supervisor of the
Mhm.
old school
Yeah.
contact center, right? So that's a fascinating
Yeah.
process for me to observe and be a part of, I'll admit.
Well, I found this whole episode fascinating. I could listen to you for hours and hours. I'd love to arrange for you to come back on in the not too distant future and we can continue talking because I genuinely found it really, really insightful. And we got through without a siren going off for a
Yeah.
tornado or a
It sounds like
hurricane.
I'm good. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. It's again, I think that the technology is what's my passion. It doesn't matter what the industry is. It's businesses and how do you make technology the reason for them to do the things that are possible, not the cause, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's maybe the subtle difference um, in, in the approach to CX.
Well, Susan, I think you've definitely shown um, my listeners why they should be following you, why they should be following Alvaria, because there's exciting times ahead and you're doing such great work. And it's an area I'm very passionate about. So thank you so much for coming on, Get Out of Rap. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. We appreciate it, Martin.
Has he finished? Let's go.